Good morning, church. Grace and peace to you in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Welcome to worship this morning and welcome in this new way. As we are learning new things in these days, I appreciate your grace and I am grateful for your patience as we learn some new things and as we continue to try to provide worship for you that is meaningful and most of all pleasing to God. And so it is good to be with you. Friends, we entered into the Lenten season on March 1st. We began with a parade and with palms and with Jesus's procession into Jerusalem. And since then, we've looked at a different scene each week, a different scene that happens in the last week of Jesus's life. And in this final week of our Lenten season, this morning, we find Jesus and his disciples in a garden. And so I invite you to receive the word as we enter the passion of Jesus, as we try to put ourselves into this scene. Receive the word. We're looking at Luke's version here, chapter 22, 39 to 46. Jesus came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. When he reached the place, he said to them, "Pray that you may not come into the time of trial." And then he withdrew from them about a stone's throw. He knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done." And then an angel from heaven appeared to him and gave him strength. In his anguish, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became the great drops of blood falling down on the ground. When he got up from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping because of grief. And he said to them, "Why are you sleeping? Get up and pray that you may not come into the time of trial." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Friends, will you pray with me? O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable to you, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Amen. When I was a little girl, I was afraid of the dark. Maybe some of you were as well. And my mother would come in and try to comfort me. Sometimes she did, and sometimes she didn't. But what I remember is that when she left the room, I would pull the covers over my head and I would slide into a cocoon. And I would feel a sense of safety in that isolation. I taught my girls the same thing. Sometimes I would even hang out under the covers with them until they fell asleep. Carly's birthday, my baby's birthday, is on Friday. She'll be 27. Good Friday this year, the year she was born, was the evening before Easter. And it was the best gift. Friends, we're going to be celebrating her birthday a little differently this year. And I know you are experiencing that too. I know, in fact, even some of you have had birthdays in the last few weeks. And they have not been the celebration that you had wanted them to be. Surely there is grief in this. There is for me. I am grieving that we will not be able to be together the way we want to, and that I can't throw my arms around my baby and give her a great big hug. And friends, even though we are sheltering in place and we feel this sense of safety in the isolation that we're all experiencing, there's grief and there's also fear. Fear and grief are real. Fear of the unknown. We are living in such uncertainty and we don't know when this is all going to end. And grieving what we have known are real. And what I know to be true for me, and I know to be true for you because some of you have shared this with me, is that we are exhausted. These are weary times for us. Some of you have shared your fears with me, and in that I am hearing the things that you are grieving as well. And I'm hearing how weary we are. See, throughout Lent, as I mentioned, we have been putting ourselves into a different scene each week. And this morning, Jesus tells his disciples to stay and to stay awake while he goes off to pray. And they fall asleep. And it's easy for me to imagine how the disciples fell asleep. And when Jesus came back around and he found them, the text tells us that he found them because they were grieving. Grieving is exhausting. And I know that we are all grieving something right now. We are grieving loss, each and every one of us. I know because, again, like I said, some of you have shared with me, but some are grieving hymns. Some of you are missing the hymns of this season. I'm missing some of those hymns too. Some of us are missing restaurants and grocery stores, eating meals the way we used to. Some of us had vacations planned that won't be realized. Some of us are missing church. We're missing being together. I am missing you. I am missing seeing your faces every Sunday morning. Somebody posted this week, remember libraries and coffee shops? I also know that some of us are grieving the loss of a loved one. And grieving a loss of a loved one is not just grieving the loss of that person. It's also grieving the opportunity to be able to say goodbye the way we want to. Some of us are losing work. Hours are being cut. Limited schedules are being put into place. We're grieving what we know. And we're fearful of what we don't know. Friends, what the garden reveals for us this morning is that Jesus was afraid. Jesus knew fear. And Jesus was a little anxious. Anxious enough to sweat drops of blood. And the good news for us is that Jesus is connected to us because Jesus knows our emotions. Jesus knows any emotion that we can feel. And in these days, Jesus knows these emotions. That's what we have this morning. The good news. Jesus is connected to us in our grief and in our fear and in our suffering. Jesus understands, and we can trust that Jesus empathizes. Through Jesus, God is with us. And we remember this morning that God has chosen us. God has not forsaken us, nor will God ever, ever. Friends, we are all fearful of something. And we are all grieving something in these days. But the story of Jesus' passion ties our suffering together with Jesus and together as with one another, as this community, as this family of faith. We suffer together. We grieve together. That we knew and that we don't know. Friends, I hope this morning, that we'll remember that we are Easter people. And grief does not win, and fear does not win, and suffering does not win, though it's uncomfortable right now. We know how this story ends, and it doesn't end in any of those things. I have a friend who's a former kindergarten teacher, and she loved teaching this prayer to her children. It's a finger prayer, 4 little words, and she would touch a finger as she taught them how to say this prayer. And so, friends, I want to offer it to you this morning, that you would pray with me. I trust you, Jesus. That's a prayer that you can offer up to God no matter where you are, no matter what's happening around you. Your little fingers can be moving. I trust you, Jesus. I trust you, Jesus. I trust you, Jesus. Fear and grief are real, but so is resurrection. And we are headed into Easter, my friends, and we will come together next Sunday. Celebration's going to be a little different. There's some unknown around what next Sunday might look like, the way things are changing daily here. The temptation and the trial presented in the garden today is that we would let fear win, that the disciples would let grief win. Our sense of safety in this time of isolation is to do what Jesus did in that moment. Jesus went off to pray. Even though Jesus was afraid, Jesus was a bit anxious, Jesus prayed, and so can we. I trust you, Jesus. Pray with me. Holy God, your Spirit hovers around us, abides within us, and goes beyond us. You gather us together from wherever we are, even from here. Give us a longing for your prayerful presence today, that we would trust in Jesus alone. Remind us of the hope and love that we share as we gather and we enter the passion of Jesus in the days ahead. Be with those who are sick and those caring for them. Be with those who are troubled and those calming them down. And be with us. Be with us all in our fear and in our grief. And in your mercy, give your healing and peace to all. Amen.